Your place is there, you naughty girl. The cruel stepmother loses control and humiliates the special little girl, forcing her to sleep in the doghouse under the cold of dawn. But what she doesn't realize is that minutes later, the millionaire father returns early from his trip, enters through the mansion gates, and is paralyzed by what he sees. The dawn in the preserve at Sterling Oaks carried the weight of the silence that only immense wealth can purchase. Dew silvered the lawn, manicured with surgical precision, and the chilly air held the sterile scent of gourmet kibble in the garden, punctuated by the distant cry of a cat slicing through the stillness. From the window of her impeccably white bedroom, Catherine, Kate, watched the scene with a rigidity peculiar to her nature. Order. It was all she asked of the universe, a bulwark against the chaos that, in her earliest memory, was a prelude to abandonment. And little Laura, 5 years old and possessing a sweetness that disorganized schedules and certainties, was the epicenter of her private chaos. The decision, therefore, had already been made, solidified by a cold logic she mistook for discipline. It was for the girl's own good. She needed to learn limits, to understand that the world would not bend to her will. The incessant crying over the texture of her new pajamas, a noise that grated on Kate's nerves, had been the last straw. With the delicacy of someone executing a surgical movement, she took the child's hand. Laura, still sobbing, clutched the rough wool blanket, the only one she was allowed to bring. Her bare feet touched the cold marble of the hallway, and then the damp grass of the garden. The wooden house of the golden retriever, Apollo, stood empty, a dark refuge smelling of earth. "You will stay here until you learn to behave," Kate said, her voice a wire of steel, devoid of inflection. She arranged the blanket inside the small shelter and closed the small door, not latching it, but only pushing it shut, a gesture that felt like a concession to herself. She returned to the mansion, feeling the tense relief of someone who has tidied a misplaced drawer. The silence that followed was, to her, the purest form of peace. Outside, curled up, Laura began to hum softly for the baby brother sleeping in the nursery, a wordless melody meant to soothe a fear she couldn't name. Minutes later, powerful headlights cut through the fog on the lane. The soft engine sound of a luxury sedan ceased, followed by the discreet crunch of the imposing iron gate. Alexander, Alex, the father, the millionaire CEO whose equity portfolio spread across multiple investment funds, had arrived early. He stepped out of the car, the week's exhaustion visible in his shoulders, and walked along the side of the house. The cold marble beneath his designer shoes seemed to accuse him of something he didn't yet grasp. Then he heard it, a murmur, a fragile song coming from where there should be nothing but the dog. He approached and opened the small door. The sight of his daughter, huddled and trembling, her cloth doll pressed against her chest, broke something inside him. The guilt over his absence, always present, became physical, a knot in his throat. He lifted her into his arms without a word, the warmth of the small, fragile body against his expensive suit. He entered the house and found Kate in the living room, reading a book under the light of a designer lamp. She raised her eyes, surprise registering on her perfectly composed face. Alex didn't shout. His voice, when it came, was sharper than any insult. "Take her to her room. Give her a warm bath and change her clothes," he ordered two housekeepers who materialized like shadows. Then he turned to his wife, and the silence that settled between them was the sound of an ending. "It's over, Kate." It wasn't a question, nor a threat. It sounded like a judge's final sentence. Stunned, watching the world she had built with such effort crumble, she rushed to the kitchen, her hands shaking. In a desperate act of reparation, she tried to make his favorite dessert, a creme caramel. The sweet and bitter smell of scorched sugar soon filled the house, a dense, suffocating perfume that announced failure. The sun of the following morning brought no warmth, only a cold light that exposed the mansion's sterility. The smell of scorched sugar had dissipated. But the bitterness remained in the air, dense and palpable. Alex had already moved to the guest suite, a luxurious apartment at the other end of the corridor. The physical distance was a declaration. Conversations he had decreed the night before with the icy voice of someone concluding a business meeting would be strictly about the children. Kate felt the weight of every decorative object, every Persian rug, every artwork on the wall. They were elements of a stage that no longer belonged to her. She, the architect of a perfect life, was now an intruder in her own creation, her pride a cracked armor, exposing the old fear of being, once again, discarded. He did not mention the possibility of reversing the decision. The emotional capital between them seemed to have gone bankrupt. That same morning, the doorbell rang. Alex informed her via a succinct text message that he had contacted the Harrington School and that an occupational therapist, OT, recommended by them was coming for an evaluation. It was not a request, it was an order. Kate smoothed her linen dress, recomposed her posture, and opened the door, and the ground seemed to disappear beneath her feet. Standing on the threshold was a woman with a serene gaze and a professional expression, the same woman she had dismissed months earlier. "Your methods do not align with our family's image," she had said then, with an arrogance that now burned her face. Shame was a hot wave that rose up her neck. The therapist, Helena, showed no sign of recognition, her professional neutrality a form of condemnation even more potent. Helena entered and, with a calm that disarmed any hostility, sat on the living room floor with Laura. She didn't use technical terms or ask complex questions. She pulled out containers with different textured putties and small colored objects from her bag. She observed how the girl hesitated before touching the kinetic sand, how her shoulders hunched at the sound of Velcro. Kate watched everything from the sofa, a spectator in her own home, feeling judged not by the therapist's words, but by the ease with which she connected with the child. The first guidelines were clear: predictability, visual communication, and respect for sensory boundaries. Every word was a direct refutation of Kate's method of discipline. That night, from the hallway, Kate heard Alex's voice in Laura's room. It was a voice she rarely heard, devoid of the executive's rush, full of a painful tenderness. "Never outside again, sweetheart. Daddy promises, never again." The promise sealed her guilt, driving it into her chest. The weekend arrived, heavy and silent. In an awkward attempt at normalcy, Alex took them to the artisan market in Chelsea Heights. The air vibrated with colors and sounds, a stark contrast to the muteness inside the car. Laura, usually withdrawn in crowded places, stopped in front of a stall selling cloth dolls, her eyes fixed on one, with blue yarn hair and a simple dress. In an impulse she didn't understand, Kate approached a neighboring stall and bought a tiny, red satin ribbon. She knelt beside Laura and, with trembling hands, tied the ribbon as a bow in the doll's hair. Laura watched her and, for an instant that lasted an eternity, leaned her shoulder against Kate's arm, a light, almost imperceptible touch, but one that made her hold her breath. When they returned, the sun was setting, painting the sky orange and purple. George, the gardener, was finishing trimming the hedge. He was a quiet man who always avoided eye contact. But that day, he approached Alex, his crumpled straw hat held between nervous hands. "Mr. Alexander, forgive my boldness," he began, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I didn't mean to pry, but a few days ago I was near the wall, and I overheard an audio clip. It sounded like a strange conversation, coming from the neighbor's house. I didn't quite understand, but I thought you should know." The gardener's information hung between them like a toxic mist. Alex, a man trained to analyze risks and identify threats in his multi-million-dollar ventures, felt an internal alarm sound. The neighbor, Tiffany, had always been excessively cordial. Her pleasantries calculated like a stock market investment, waiting for the right moment to collect the dividends. He thanked George with a contained nod, but the seed of distrust was planted. Kate, for her part, felt a chill. Tiffany was central to the social circle of the HOA, her influence a powerful asset. An enmity with her could turn isolation into public exile. The small victory of the red ribbon on the doll suddenly seemed fragile, insignificant. Laura's brief shoulder touch now felt like a goodbye. In the days that followed, Alex plunged into work, but his mind was at home. He retreated to his office, a sanctuary of mahogany and leather, where the world's complexities could be reduced to cash flow statements and profitability reports. While organizing a drawer of old documents, searching for a financial application contract, his hand touched a yellowed envelope. It was the handwriting of his late wife, Laura's mother. He hadn't opened it in years. With a heavy heart, he pulled the sheet out. It wasn't a will of assets or a division of wealth, but a letter written shortly before her passing. The words were simple, direct, and they hit him with the force of a revelation. "Take care of our girl," she had written. "Don't surround her with luxury, but with patience. Ensure she grows up surrounded by people willing to learn from her as much as they teach her." He reread the phrase several times. The guilt he felt over his absence began to change shape. It was no longer a vague debt, a liability on his emotional balance sheet. It became a clear responsibility, a mission. The weight of that inheritance wasn't in dollars or shares. But in those words, Tiffany's strike came 2 days later. It was subtle, as always. A message on the HOA Mother's Listserv, phrased with false concern. "Does anyone know if little Laura is doing all right? I heard a terrible rumor that Kate wants to pull her out of school. Maybe she's embarrassed by the girl's condition." So sad. The poison spread quickly. Late that afternoon, the phone rang. It was the school principal, her voice filled with contained indignation, requesting an urgent meeting. The humiliation was immediate. Alex hung up the phone, his face a mask of cold fury. He went to the living room, where Kate was folding Laura's clothes with mechanical precision. He confronted her, not with the question of someone seeking truth, but with the accusation of someone who has already found it. "Did you try to pull Laura out of school?" Kate went pale. The air left her lungs. The truth was more complex and, at that moment, impossible to explain. "No, I never," she began, but her voice failed. The truth was that yes, after a particularly difficult sensory meltdown Laura had on the school playground the week before, Kate, in a moment of panic and despair, had called another institution, a more secluded one, and requested transfer information. It was an impulse, a mistake born of the fear of not knowing how to act, but the proof was there. With a trembling voice, she admitted, "I only researched another option. I was scared." For Alex, strengthened by the promise made to his late wife, the confession was confirmation of everything: the shame, the inability to learn. He looked at her as if she were a stranger, a high-risk application that had finally proven to be a loss. His decision was instantaneous, his voice sharp as ice. "I need to travel to finalize the sale of part of the company. The boys are coming with me. The house is large, Kate. Use this time to pack your things." The sound of Alex's car engine faded into the distance, and the automatic gate closed with a soft, definitive click. Kate stood in the living room, her hand still resting on the cold glass pane, watching the empty lane. The silence that descended upon the house was not peaceful. It was a vacuum, a predator that swallowed all noises, even that of her own breathing. The echo of her footsteps on the polished marble seemed accusatory as she wandered through the rooms, a deposed queen in her deserted palace. Every object was a reminder of what she had lost. His office, smelling of leather and paper, now seemed the control center of a life from which she had been expelled. Their marriage, once a successful merger, a business that generated social profit and stability, had become a toxic asset he was liquidating to avoid further losses. She was the liability on his personal balance sheet. She entered Laura's room. It was tidied with her usual precision, but the girl's absence made it sterile. On the perfectly stretched bed, the cloth doll with the red ribbon stared at her with button eyes. Kate picked it up. The fabric was soft, the satin ribbon a vibrant point of color amid the grayness of her despair. She remembered Laura's shoulder leaning against hers, a contact so brief, so fragile, that it now seemed like a hallucination. How could she have believed that such a small gesture could compensate for such a monumental failure? Her perfectionism, the armor she had worn all her life to protect herself, was the cause of her ruin. She had built a fortress so impenetrable that no one, not even a child, could find a crack to enter. The loneliness led her to the bedroom she had shared with Alex. His closet doors were open, the shelves empty. He had been efficient, surgical, as he always was when liquidating an investment that no longer offered the expected profitability. He had left her with the boxes, as he suggested, but they weren't cardboard boxes. They were the ruins of her life, and she didn't know where to begin the tidying. She looked at herself in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman she saw. The impeccable posture, the aligned hair, the subtle makeup, everything seemed a farce. Beneath that facade of control, there was only the same fear that had haunted her since childhood, the dread of not being good enough, of being left behind. Aimlessly, she went downstairs. On the living room coffee table, a thin folder that the therapist, Helena, had left on her last visit caught her attention. She had ignored it until then. She opened it with hesitant fingers. Inside, there were no psychological jargon or complex theses. There were sheets with simple drawings, lists of concrete actions, a roadmap for a world she didn't know. Visual communication, use picture cards to anticipate the routine. Positive reinforcement, celebrate small achievements with a sticker or praise. Sensory environment, before going out, describe the sounds and textures they will encounter. It was an instruction manual for her stepdaughter's heart, written in a language she didn't speak. She flipped through the pages, feeling the weight of her own ignorance. One of the sheets showed a routine board with spaces to stick figures of a sun, morning, a plate, lunch, and a moon, night. It was so simple, so childish. And to her, it seemed more complex than any stock market report. The phone on the nearby table remained silent, a sentinel of her solitude. There would be no calls, no messages. She was alone with that manual, a map of a territory she herself had turned into a desert. The house remained silent for 2 days. Then, on the 3rd day, the familiar engine sound broke the quietness. Alex and the children had returned. He entered first, his face impassive, and placed the suitcases in the entrance hall with the formality of a guest. The children followed, exhausted from the trip. Laura was strangely quiet, her face flushed and her shoulders hunched. Maria, the cook with gentle features and an observant gaze, was the first to notice. As she helped the girl take off her coat, she touched her forehead. "Mr. Alexander, she is burning up with fever," she said, worry creasing her brow. Alex, who was already on the phone discussing the fluctuation of his stocks, abruptly ended the call. He acted with his usual efficiency. He called the best pediatrician in the state and asked him to come immediately. He managed the crisis as he managed his businesses with resources and precise orders, but his gaze toward his daughter was one of pure anguish. The fever rose quickly. Laura, in her discomfort, rejected everything and everyone. Her glazed eyes wouldn't focus, and any attempt to touch her was met with a gasping sob. She didn't want her father's lap. She wouldn't accept Maria's affection. Kate watched from a distance, feeling like the least qualified person in the world to help. The order to pack her things echoed in her mind. Intervening would be an intrusion, a breach of the tacit agreement of her exclusion. However, Seeing the girl's suffering and the helplessness on Alex's face ignited something in her. It wasn't a strategy. It wasn't a plan to win back her place. It was a primitive impulse to care. While Alex was on the phone on the veranda, negotiating the terms of a new investment in euros, Kate sat in the living room armchair, feeling like a ghost. She picked up her cell phone without a clear purpose and began scrolling through old files, a shared cloud folder she hadn't opened in months, a digital relic of the family they once were. There were vacation photos, videos of the baby's first birthday, and then she saw it. An audio file with a simple name, Lullaby Laura. With a pounding heart, she clicked. The soft voice of Laura's mother, clear and melodious, filled the silence. It was a simple lullaby, almost a whisper, an inheritance not listed in any will, an intangible asset of incalculable value. Night fell and the fever peaked. The doctor had come and medicated her, but Laura's sensory discomfort kept her agitated and crying. In the room, Maria tried to apply a damp cloth to the girl's forehead, but she thrashed around. Alex paced back and forth, cell phone in hand, awaiting news of a deal in another part of the world. Kate took a deep breath, gathered a courage she didn't know she possessed, and entered the room. She showed the cell phone to Maria, who nodded with teary eyes. Kate pressed play. The recording filled the room. Laura's crying diminished to a whimper. She stopped struggling. Kate, then, with a trembling and slightly off-key voice, began to hum along with the recording. The melody was fragile on her lips, but it was real. Laura turned her head in her direction. Her little eyes slowly closed. Her breathing, previously ragged, became rhythmic and deep. And then the small, warm hand sought Kate's and held it with surprising strength. The fever didn't subside completely, but the struggle was over. Maria, from the doorway, witnessed the scene and left without a sound. Kate remained there, sitting on the edge of the bed, the girl's hand in hers, fear and pride dissolving in a wave of pure and overwhelming emotion. Hours later, the door opened. Alex entered, his face tired. He had just closed a deal that would increase his net worth considerably, but the profit seemed irrelevant. His eyes fixed on the scene, his daughter sleeping peacefully, and his wife, the woman he had condemned to exile, holding her hand like an anchor. He stood still, silent, his expression indecipherable. In the kitchen, Alex's cell phone vibrated with a new message from Maria. The text was short, but it carried the weight of the world. She stayed all night. The morning after the fever broke with a different light, there was a fragile truce in the air, a quietness that was no longer of absence, but of expectation. Alex watched Kate from afar, with the caution of an investor analyzing a volatile asset that, against all odds, showed a peak in profitability. The image of her, asleep in the armchair next to Laura's bed, the girl's hand still loosely holding hers, had been etched into his mind. It didn't erase the past, but it complicated the future he had already decreed. He didn't revoke the sentence, but for the first time, he allowed himself to doubt it. For Kate, the night had been an epiphany. The sensation of that small, warm hand in hers was the only inheritance that mattered. A treasure she hadn't known she was seeking. The fear of rejection was still there, but now it was counterbalanced by something new, responsibility for that bond. It was Alex who called the therapist. "I think we're ready to try your suggestions," he said on the phone, his voice neutral, but the attitude was a concession. When Helena arrived, Kate greeted her at the door not with the shame of the first time, but with the humility of a student. She no longer had an image to uphold. She only had a path to learn. Helena, sensing the change, went straight to the point. She spread a large sheet of poster board on the living room table and handed Kate scissors, glue, and colored pens. "We are going to build Laura's world," she said simply. "A world she can see and understand." It was the proposal for the visual routine board. Kate, The woman who orchestrated luxury events with impeccable schedules plunged into the task with fierce dedication. Her perfectionism, once a weapon of control, transformed into a communication tool. She drew a yellow sun for morning, a cloud with raindrops for bath time, a plate with a smile for meals. Each figure was simple, clear, an antidote to the complexity that so frightened her. She used Velcro so the images could be moved, creating an interactive system. While working, she felt a peace she hadn't found in years. She wasn't building a facade, she was building a bridge. When Laura woke up, still pale but fever-free, Kate took her to the board fixed on the playroom wall. "Look, sweetie," she said, her voice soft. "In the morning, the sun, then the food." She pointed to the figures. Laura looked at the board, her head tilted. Her tiny fingers touched the figure of a bathtub full of soap bubbles, one of her few sensory pleasures. She looked at Kate and emitted a soft sound, a babble of recognition. Helena, who was observing closely, smiled. "That is a start. Now, for every completed task, she gets a star." She handed Kate a sheet of gold stickers. That night, after the bath, a process that for the first time in weeks occurred without tears, anticipated by the figure on the board, Kate helped Laura stick the first gold star. The small, glittering sticker on the poster board seemed more valuable than all the gold stored in Alex's vaults. Alex watched the scene from the doorway, silent. There was an order there, a harmony that money couldn't buy. He approached. "Helena said this would help," he commented, his voice neutral, but it was the most recognition he could offer. It was enough. For the first time in days, Kate felt a thread of hope. That small board seemed like the foundation of something new. The next day, the sun was shining, and the routine flowed with unprecedented calm. Alex decided to work from home. In the middle of the afternoon, while Kate and Laura were watering the flowers in the garden, his cell phone rang. It was Tiffany. "Alex, darling," the neighbor began, her voice distilling false sweetness. "I hate to bother you, but a friend who works in the administration at the Harrington School called me. She said Laura's transfer papers are ready for signature." It seems Kate didn't just inquire. She actually initiated the process. Alex froze. He looked out the window at the garden, at Kate smiling while Laura tried to hold the water hose. The scene that had seconds before seemed like a glimpse of redemption, now transformed into a cruel, well-executed farce. The scene in the garden, which moments before was an oasis of hope, turned into a desert of disillusionment for Alex. Laura's laugh, Kate's hesitant smile, everything became part of an elaborate staging. He felt the familiar chill of betrayal rise through his veins. The same feeling that warned him of a bad investment or a disloyal business partnership. His face, which had softened, hardened again, transforming into the impenetrable mask of the billionaire who couldn't afford to be wrong. He hung up the phone and walked into the garden, his expensive shoes crushing the perfectly manicured grass. The afternoon sun hit his face, but he felt no warmth. Kate saw him approach, and her smile faltered. Sensing the storm in his eyes, she put down the watering can. Laura, feeling the abrupt change in atmosphere, stopped playing and hid behind Kate's legs. "The papers for Laura's transfer are ready for signature," Alex said. His voice was devoid of emotion, the same he used in a boardroom to announce the closure of a department. It was not a question, it was an execution. Kate felt the air snatched from her lungs. "Alex, it's not what it looks like. It was a mistake, a moment of panic. I called yes, but I wouldn't go through with it. I swear." The words stumbled over each other, desperate, fragile. She tried to explain the fear, the sense of failure after the school crisis, the impulsive search for a solution that seemed, in that moment of weakness, easier. But her justifications shattered against the wall of certainty he had erected. To him, it was just another lie. a manipulation to hide the inconvenient truth. She didn't want the responsibility. "Stop, Kate," he cut her off, his voice low and lethal. "I can't trust you anymore." I looked at this scene and for a moment I believed it. It was a miscalculation on my part. He knelt and picked Laura up, who clung to him, frightened. "It's truly over now." He stood up, his daughter safe in his arms as his only truly valuable asset. "I want you out." Discreetly and definitively. Then came the blow she didn't expect, the facet of the man who solved everything with capital. "I don't want a scandal, especially now that the audit for the company sale is underway. I will ensure you lose nothing. In fact, you will gain. I will set up a trust for you, transfer a stock portfolio that will guarantee you a lifetime income, a generous amount. Consider it a contract severance, a non-disclosure agreement, an investment in our peace." He was offering money, a fortune for her to disappear. He was liquidating their marriage as if it were a devalued stock position. In that instant, something inside Kate broke and solidified into something hard as diamond. The humiliation of the night in the doghouse, the shame before the therapist, the pain of rejection, none of it compared to this. He wasn't expelling her for a mistake. He was paying to get rid of a problem. All her effort, the sleepless night, the joy of sticking the first gold star on the board, everything was reduced to a financial transaction. Wounded pride, the strength that had guided her throughout her life, emerged from the ashes of her despair. Her eyes, previously pleading, became cold and clear. She faced him, her posture erect, the queen recovering her throne, even if only for one last moment. "Keep your money, Alex," she said, her voice firm, cutting, without a single tremor. "I don't want a cent of your assets." She turned and walked toward the house, leaving him standing in the middle of the garden, the child in his arms and a multi-million-dollar offer dead on his lips. Kate's refusal was not an impulsive act, but the sound of a foundation settling. By rejecting the money, she rejected the narrative that she was a liability to be discarded. For the first time, she was not acting out of fear of abandonment, but out of a newfound conviction. She wasn't leaving, not because she wanted the wealth or status, but because the image of that small hand holding hers in the feverish darkness had become her only true inheritance. She wouldn't leave the house, but she would move to the smallest guest room downstairs near the kitchen. It was a silent declaration of war, an occupation. She wouldn't fight for Alex, but for Laura. Alex, caught off guard by the refusal, a scenario his financial calculations hadn't predicted, accepted the standoff with corporate coldness. They would live under the same roof, but in parallel universes, two partners in a joint project called Laura, with clearly defined emotional distancing clauses. The tension in the house became the new routine. Meals were silent, the hallways, borders. Alex accelerated preparations for the company sale, plunging into meetings and video calls, using work as an anesthetic. Tiffany, noticing Kate had not departed, intensified her campaign. The neighbor now called frequently, under the pretense of offering support to Alex, sharing neighborhood gossip and subtly undermining Kate's image. "It's so brave of you to keep her around, Alex, after everything. But be careful. Her emotional instability could be a risk to the children," she said, her voice poisoned velvet. Her presence next door was constant, a visible reminder of her influence and her increasingly explicit romantic interests. Oblivious to the intrigues, or perhaps protected by them, Kate focused on her sole mission, the routine board. She and Laura spent hours together, cutting out new figures, sticking star stickers, and celebrating every small victory. Each morning, Laura ran to the board to see the sequence of the day. Predictability was her safe harbor. Gradually, Kate learned to anticipate crises. She took noise-canceling headphones to the grocery store. She chose clothes with soft fabrics and no tags. She cut food into specific shapes. They were no longer the instructions from a manual. They were gestures born of observation and affection. On a rainy afternoon, while assembling a puzzle on the living room floor, Laura, without any warning, laid her head on Kate's lap and stayed there, quiet, for almost 5 minutes. The weight of that trust was overwhelming. Kate remained motionless, barely breathing, feeling warm tears trace her face. Meanwhile, the audit for the company's sale progressed, led by a team of which Tiffany was a part as an external consultant, a position that gave her access to privileged information about Alex's assets and businesses. She used this access with surgical precision. One day, during a visit to the house to pick up a document with Alex, she accidentally left her purse on the living room table. Later, after her departure, Kate found the forgotten purse. An impulse, a growing suspicion, made her hesitate. Decency told her not to touch it, but the instinct for survival screamed. With trembling hands, she opened the clasp. At the top, next to an expensive lipstick and a bunch of keys, was a cell phone. It wasn't Tiffany's main device, but an older one, driven by a force she didn't understand. She turned it on. The screen lit up, revealing the audio gallery. There was only one recording. The title was Instruction. Kate's heart hammered against her ribs. She pressed play. Tiffany's voice, unmistakable, filled the silence of the room. Completely blind, friend. The man is a genius at making money, but a fool for what happens under his nose. The audit is in my hands. Once the sale is finalized and the cash flow multiplies, my position will be guaranteed. And the other one. The poor thing is so lost it was easy to give her a nudge. A piece of advice here, a suggestion there. She dug the hole herself. That man's net worth is going to be mine by right. The sound of her own voice, hesitant and weak, echoing alongside Tiffany's poisonous instruction, was like a punch to the gut. Kate tasted bitterness in her mouth. It was the proof that she had been manipulated, that her worst action was born not only of her fear, but of the cruel seed planted by someone else. But the recording was a double-edged sword. There, too, was her weakness, her passivity, the voice of a woman so desperate for a script that she accepted a villain's lines. Showing that to Alex now would be an act of desperation. He would see only confirmation of her failure, an attempt to shift blame, to sabotage Tiffany, who had become a key player in negotiating his empire. A deal involving millions of dollars and the reputation he prized so highly. He wouldn't believe her. She needed more. She needed the right moment. Her brain, trained for strategy and control, took over. Panic gave way to icy clarity. She couldn't keep the phone. Tiffany would notice its absence at any moment. With trembling hands, she navigated the device's menus, found the audio file, and sent it to her own email, an old, rarely used address. The upload seemed to take an eternity. Every second was a risk. As soon as the transfer was complete, she deleted the sent email and turned off the device, placing it back in the purse exactly as she had found it. Her heart pounded uncontrollably. She needed to return the purse without anyone knowing she had opened it. The only person she could trust was Maria. With a flimsy excuse that Tiffany must be worried, she asked the cook to take the purse to the neighbor's house and give it to one of the staff, saying she had found it near the entrance. Maria, with her wise gaze that saw everything and spoke little, merely nodded, took the purse, and left. A silent accomplice to an act she didn't understand, but whose weight she felt. Kate spent the rest of the afternoon in a state of anxious numbness. The evidence was safe, a digital secret stored in a cloud. But it felt like a ticking time bomb in her chest. She sat on the floor of the playroom, the routine board in front of her, a testament to her effort. The gold stars seemed to mock her. What good was building this fragile bridge if the ground around it was about to collapse? Laura, sensing her distress, approached quietly. The girl watched her for an instant, head tilted. Then she went to her toy basket, picked up the cloth doll with the red ribbon. and solemnly deposited it on Kate's lap, a gift, an anchor. Kate embraced her, the sweet scent of the girl's hair filling her senses, and her resolution solidified. She wasn't fighting only for her innocence, but for that hug, for that world of gold stars and cloth dolls. That night, Alex arrived later than usual. There was contained excitement in his gestures, the energy of a man about to close the biggest deal of his life. He stopped in the middle of the living room, loosening his tie. "The final cocktail party with the investors is Friday, at the Glass Conservatory," he announced, the tone formal, as if speaking to an assistant. Kate remained silent. Then he looked at her, and the ice in his eyes was deep, impenetrable. "Tiffany did an exceptional job on the audit. She will be the hostess by my side." He paused, letting the weight of those words settle. "Kate, I think it would be better for everyone if you didn't attend. We don't need any more drama or complications right now. Stay home with the children." It was the final blow, a public exile, an order to become invisible. He was erasing her from the official photograph of his life, in front of his entire world, leaving her behind with the toys and the routines. Alex's order for her to be absent from the cocktail party didn't make her cry. The tears had dried, replaced by a cold, sharp determination. Humiliation was fuel, and for the first time, she wouldn't use it to defend herself, but to attack. Being invisible was no longer a punishment, it was a strategic advantage. While he and Tiffany prepared for the stage, she would move in the shadows, where the most dangerous truths hide. Her battlefield would not be the opulent ballroom of the Glass Conservatory, but the reality she was building day after day with Laura. He had liquidated her as a low-performing asset, but had forgotten to verify her true value. And a bad investment, she knew, always exacts its price. The next morning, in an act of silent defiance, she took Laura to the local community park. It was a test for both of them. The outside world, with its noises and unpredictability, was the greatest obstacle, but Kate was prepared. Before leaving, she showed Laura on the routine board the figure of a tree and a swing. In her purse, she carried the noise-cancelling headphones, a bottle of soap bubbles, and the doll with the red ribbon. In the park, the air smelled of freshly cut grass and sweet popcorn. Instead of shrinking away, Laura, wearing the colored headphones adorned with star stickers, observed everything with serene curiosity. Kate knelt in front of her and blew soap bubbles, which floated like lazy little rainbows against the blue sky. Laura followed them with her eyes, a pure smile spreading across her face. It was then that she pointed to a dog passing by with its owner and looked at Kate, the smile still there, an invitation to share the joy. In that instant, in the middle of the park, Kate felt a connection more real and valuable than any fortune Alex could accumulate. Upon returning home, the afternoon sun gilding the garden, they found George, the gardener, pruning roses near the porch. He seemed more nervous than usual, sweat shining on his forehead despite the mild weather. He turned off the trimmer when he saw them approach and took off his hat, crumpling it between his hands. "Mrs. Alexander, Kate," he began, his voice low, avoiding eye contact. "I need to speak with you." He looked around as if the mansion walls had ears. "That day, I told Mr. Alexander I heard an audio clip, but I didn't tell him everything. I was afraid of losing my job. Around here, we learn not to interfere." He took a deep breath. "But I see you with the girl. Different now, and my conscience won't leave me alone." Kate's heart began to beat faster. "What did you hear, George?" He didn't answer with words. Instead, he reached into his work pants pocket and pulled out an old cell phone with a scratched screen and worn casing. "My phone is old. Sometimes it records things on its own in my pocket," he explained, as if apologizing. "I was trimming the hedge near Miss Tiffany's living room window. It was before that night. I only found the recording days later, cleaning out the memory." He extended the device to Kate. Her hand trembled as she took it. It was heavy, not because of its size, but because of what it might contain. I don't know if it helps, but you need to hear this. Kate looked at the device in her hand. It was the second piece of the puzzle, one she hadn't known existed. With the cocktail party approaching like an execution date, she held in her hands the weight of the truth, or her definitive ruin. The night air felt thin when Kate sat in the cold armchair of the office, the gardener's phone in her hands. With a click, the recording began. The quality was poor, muffled by the pocket fabric and the distant hum of the hedge trimmer. But the voice was unmistakably Tiffany's, and what she said was far worse than Kate could have imagined. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a confession. Tiffany was talking on the phone with someone, her voice relaxed, smug, the voice of someone who plays and knows they will win. Completely blind, honey. The man is a genius at making money, but a fool for what happens right under his nose. The audit is in my hands. As soon as the sale is finalized and the cash flow multiplies, my position will be guaranteed. And the other one, the poor woman is so clueless that it was easy to give her a little push. A tip here, a suggestion there. She dug her own hole. That man's net worth is going to be mine by right. Kate stopped the recording, the silence of the room buzzing in her ears. It was the smoking gun, irrefutable proof of manipulation, motive, cold and calculated greed. Tiffany's plan wasn't just to seduce Alex. It was to seize control of his fortune, using Kate's vulnerability and Laura's condition as pawns on her board. The first reaction was a volcanic impulse to run to Alex's room, throw the phone in his lap, and scream the truth. But the image of his face, hard and disdainful, stopped her. He had forbidden her from going to the cocktail party to avoid drama. What would this be, if not the biggest of dramas? He would accuse her of forging the recording, of manipulating an employee, of a desperate and pathetic attempt to sabotage the woman he had chosen to stand beside him at the moment of his greatest business triumph. He wouldn't listen to her. The door to him was closed, locked by his own distrust. She felt cornered, holding the truth, but with no one to hand it to. She descended the stairs, the weight of the secret curving her shoulders. Laura was sitting on the living room rug, concentrated on fitting the pieces of a wooden puzzle. Seeing Kate, the girl pointed to the sound system and then to a music note figure glued to the wall, outside the routine board, an addition they had made together. Music, she requested, the word still a shapeless sound, but the intention crystal clear. Kate put on a soft, classical melody. Laura returned to her puzzle, and after fitting the last piece, crawled to Kate and, as she had done in the park, leaned against her, the small, warm body conveying a calm that belied the hurricane in Kate's chest. It was there, in that gesture of pure trust, that the answer emerged. It wasn't about her. It wasn't about winning Alex back or taking revenge on Tiffany. It was about protecting that sanctuary, that moment of peace. Her mind, previously clouded by panic, became a laser. If she couldn't go to Alex, she needed to find someone who could, someone whose word he would never question. The name surfaced in her mind with the force of a revelation. Arthur, the attorney, the advisor, the friend of more than 30 years, the only man Alex listened to without filters, whose opinion on investments, business, and life was worth more than that of any market analyst. Alex might doubt his wife, but he wouldn't doubt Arthur. It was her last card, a high-risk application. She picked up her cell phone, found Arthur's contact, and with steady fingers, and typed a short-tongue objective message, mirroring the language they understood. Arthur, this is Kate. Apologies for the contact. I have in hand audio evidence, legally obtained, that proves an act of industrial sabotage and manipulation that compromises the integrity of the audit and puts Alex's family welfare at risk. The cocktail party is tonight. I need 5 minutes. She pressed send. Time stopped. Every second of waiting was torture. The cocktail party would begin in less than 3 hours. Her cell phone remained silent, a small, dark tombstone in her hand. The following hours were the longest of Kate's life. The sun set, and the mansion lights automatically turned on, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to move with her anxiety. From upstairs, she heard the sounds of Alex preparing. The click of a leather belt, the soft sound of expensive shoes on the hardwood floor. He was donning the armor for his night of glory, the celebration of a deal that would transform his status from multimillionaire to billionaire, an agreement that would redefine the size of his fortune. And she, downstairs, was unarmed, waiting for an answer that might never come. With every passing minute, her hope diminished, corroded by the certainty that Arthur would ignore her, dismissing her message as the delusion of a scorned wife. She went to Laura's room. The girl was sleeping, her face serene, the cloth doll nestled under her chin. That was her only valuable inheritance, the only asset that mattered. Exactly at 8:15 that night, when the cocktail party had already begun and Kate was about to surrender to despair, her cell phone vibrated, a single word on the screen from Arthur's number, address. Her heart skipped a beat. She replied with the mansion's location. 10 minutes later, a discreet black sedan stopped in front of the gate. Arthur stepped out. He was a middle-aged man with graying hair and a gaze that seemed to calculate risk in every interaction. He didn't come in. He waited for her at the service entrance, a gesture indicating the urgency and discretion of the visit. Kate met him there, in the dim light of the wall sconce. There were no greetings. "You have 5 minutes, Kate, and this better be good," he said, his voice grave. Without a word, she handed him her cell phone and George's old device. 2 audio clips. The first is a recording Tiffany made of me, inciting me. The second is from the gardener. He recorded her unintentionally, talking about her plans, not just about me, but about the audit. Arthur took the devices. Using his own wireless headphones, he listened to the first recording. His expression didn't change. Then he listened to the second, and there, under the faint light of the sconce, Kate saw Arthur's professional mask crack. His eyes narrowed, his jaw clenched. He wasn't listening to domestic drama. He was listening to the confession of a fraud, a sabotage that, if made public, could nullify the sale, destroy Alex's reputation, and jeopardize the validity of a deal involving a cash flow of hundreds of millions of dollars. The risk wasn't just personal. It was a direct attack on the capital and assets of his most important client. He removed the headphones, the silence heavy between them. He faced her, his gaze no longer that of a judge, but of a strategist who had just discovered an ambush. "Alex already started the opening speech," he said, looking at his watch. The sound of crickets in the garden seemed deafening. For Kate, it was the end of the line. She had tried. She had arrived too late, but Arthur wasn't a man who backed down. He opened the car door. "Get in," he ordered, his voice now loaded with a steel urgency. "We are going to the glass conservatory, now." Kate hesitated for a millisecond, the image of Alex's furious face in her mind, but Arthur's gaze was an order and a promise. She got into the car. The engine roared, and the vehicle sped away into the night, the lights of Sterling Oaks passing in blurs, taking her toward the party from which she had been banned, to the center of the hurricane that was about to explode. The glass conservatory shone like a jewel in the city night, an aquarium of luxury where the financial elite celebrated themselves. Inside, the air was thin, scented with jasmine and the smell of success. Alex was in the center of the ballroom, on a small stage, microphone in hand, his face illuminated by a spotlight. Beside him, Tiffany smiled, the personification of victory, her arm delicately placed on his. It was the peak of her plan. Kate and Arthur entered through a side door, like thieves. No one noticed them. Waiters floated with trays of sparkling wine, and the buzz of conversations about interest rates and dividends filled the space. "This deal," Alex was saying, his voice resonating through the speakers, "is not just a milestone for the company, but a testament to the power of trust and partnership." It was at that moment that Arthur moved. He didn't run. He walked with the deliberate calm of a man who knows he holds all the power. He climbed the stage steps and placed his hand on Alex's shoulder, whispering something in his ear. The audience fell silent, confused. Alex stopped speaking, irritation visible on his face. He turned to Arthur, ready to reprimand him, but the expression on his friend's face froze him. It was an expression he had never seen, a mixture of urgency and profound disappointment. Tiffany, sensing the change, tried to intervene with a smile, but Arthur ignored her completely. He guided Alex off the stage, toward an office with glass walls. Kate followed them, her heart hammering against her ribs. Inside, away from curious eyes, Arthur placed George's cell phone on the mahogany table and pressed play. Alex listened. The color drained from his face. He didn't just hear the fraud, the greed, the manipulation of his assets. He heard the sound of his own blindness, the soundtrack of his failure as a father and husband. He looked at Tiffany, who had followed them to the door, and then at Kate, standing in the corner. And for the first time, he saw the cold strategy in the eyes of one and the silent pain in the eyes of the other. Tiffany tried to defend herself, accusing Kate of setting her up, but her voice no longer held the velvet of persuasion, only the scratch of panic. Alex raised his hand, silencing her. His voice, when it came, was that of a man who had just lost everything and, in the process, found the only thing that mattered. The only toxic asset here, Tiffany, was you. "It's over." He turned to Kate. The arrogance, the pride, the coldness, everything had dissolved. What remained was a man stripped bare. He'd broken. "Kate, he swallowed hard. "I turned my absence into money. I thought buying time and solutions was the same as being present. I judged you. I condemned you. Forgive me. It wasn't a request for reconciliation. It was a confession." And Kate, looking at the man in front of her, saw Laura's father. "We both made mistakes, Alex, but now only she matters." The event outside, to save appearances, transformed into a stylized charity gala. The music changed to a soft Latin jazz. It was when Tiffany, in a final act of desperation, grabbed the microphone. "How lovely to see this family reunited," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Especially after hearing that little Laura was forced to sleep in the doghouse. A lesson in discipline, isn't it, Kate?" The ballroom held its breath. A deathly silence fell over the party. Kate felt every gaze on her. The final humiliation televised to the entire city elite. But then, on the other side of the improvised dance floor, something happened. Laura, who was with Maria, wearing a red dress and her noise-canceling headphones, broke free. She crossed the empty space, step by step, the cloth doll pressed against her chest. The entire ballroom watched, mesmerized. She stopped in front of Kate, ignoring the crowd, and with her free hand, pulled on the hem of her dress. She looked up, and her gesture was clear, universal. "Stay with me." Alex approached, stopped beside them, and with a firm voice, not that of the executive, but of the man who had learned to stay, said for anyone who cared to hear, "This is our home." Justice, in the end, didn't come with the bang of a gavel in a courtroom, but with the gentle tug of a red dress. The scene at the glass conservatory unfolded with the speed of falling dominoes. Tiffany's attempt to execute a public humiliation backfired, turning into her own exposure. The whispers in the ballroom changed tone. The mockery directed at Kate gave way to an icy disdain for Tiffany, whose sponsors and social allies began to withdraw before the night was even over. Alex, with a calm that surprised even himself, publicly announced that the company sale was suspended. He didn't give explanations about fraud or manipulation. He simply said he had re-evaluated his priorities and that his greatest investment from that moment on would be in his family. The financial loss was immediate and substantial, but for the first time in his life, Alex felt his real net worth was, in fact, increasing. The drive home was silent, but it wasn't the heavy silence of distance, but the quietness of those who don't need words. The next day, they sat at the kitchen table, not as accuser and accused, but as two partners renegotiating the terms of a contract they had both broken. Kate spoke about her fear of being discarded, a dread that led her to confuse discipline with harshness, perfection with affection. Alex admitted his own failure, the way he used money and business as an excuse not to confront his absence, outsourcing affection and buying easy solutions for complex problems. There was no magical forgiveness, but an agreement, a post-nup, as he called it with a sad smile, but one that didn't divide assets but established responsibilities. The child would always be at the center of all decisions. The changes were gradual, built with the patience of someone assembling a puzzle. Alex implemented a flexible schedule policy at his firm, giving up nightly meetings and unnecessary travel. Mornings began with cell phone-free coffee, and late afternoons were dedicated to visits to the community park, armed with soap bubbles and the certainty of routine. Kate, in turn, cancelled her most glamorous contracts. In a twist that surprised everyone, she sought out Helena, the therapist, and proposed a partnership. Together, they opened a small community studio, not for celebrities, but for families, a space dedicated to creating sensory routines and visual communication tools for children with special needs. She traded the glamour of image consulting for the real light she saw in the eyes of a mother who could finally understand her child's world. The doghouse, the epicenter of the pain, was dismantled. In its place, with George's help, they planted a flower bed with lavender and basil, whose soft perfume now filled the air at dusk. Laura no longer slept in an impeccable room, but in a safe haven, with the routine board on the wall, a constellation of gold stars witnessing her daily achievements. Their success was not measured in dividends or profitability, but in small habits won through renunciation, notes in lunchboxes, shortened meetings, hands held firmly. They didn't know if the marriage would survive in the traditional format, but they had built something stronger, a partnership based on the only luxury that resists time, the courage to stay every day. And at night, when Laura slept, the cloth doll dressed in red, a gift from a stepmother who learned to love, was always nestled against the right chest.